Thank you, Kevin. I'd like to thank John and Cameron and Kevin for inviting me to participate in this afternoon's session to describe some of the work that Spark's doing to help try to support the PKP project. What we're working on is to try to develop design principles for the design of collective funding models. And so again, we want that to help inform the PKP project, but we also think it'll be useful for other projects as well that want to use collective funding to sustain open resources. So why talk about collective funding design? Well, I think there's certainly in the library world there's recognition that a market model isn't going to scale with the increasing the growth in the research output, and also that an APC model doesn't work very well outside of biomedicine and the life sciences. So there's a need for alternative models. And within the academy, where there's a culture of sharing and an economy of sharing, collective models seem well suited. They match the ethos of libraries and librarians, and so there's reason to believe that they'll be well received. And there have already been a number of collective funding initiatives. Scope 3 is well known. Archive works on a collective model. Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, Knowledge Unlatched in the monograph side. But there have been a lot of, those successes masked a lot of failures or underperforming initiatives. So what we want to do is help, again, provide guidelines to make the models more successful, make them easier to organize, less expensive to organize, because organizing cost is a real critical aspect of collective action, make them stable in the long term, and increase the participation base. So we're not talking about the same 250 libraries supporting collective funding initiatives. There's also been increased interest on the part of collection development librarians to have criteria, guidelines to evaluate some of these projects, know which ones they should fund. A few years ago, there was, one or two would come along each year. Now, it's not exactly a spate, but it's more than a trickle, and they need to be able to evaluate which projects are worthy of consideration. And so we hope to be able to provide some insight there. So, if libraries and the academy are amenable to collective models, why don't they just happen spontaneously? Why don't we, if it's that simple and that obvious, then why aren't we just aren't libraries just acting again spontaneously to support open resources? Well, fortunately, the explanation of the problem is well known. Solution not so much, but the problem itself is that open resources are public goods. That is, they're non-excludable. Once they're made open, they're open to everybody, and they're non-rivalrous in use. That is, they don't get consumed by use. No matter how many users they have, it makes no difference. And so typically those types of public goods are provided by governments through taxation. So defense, clean air, police force, public parks, things like that are sustained by governments. But when we talk about the private provision of public goods, which is what we're talking about now, you don't have that, you can't compel participation. And so what happens is individual institutions, in their economic self-interest, it's in their self-interest not to act, to let other institutions participate, even if the institution would benefit. So what happens is you have a lot of institutions waiting for others to act, and this leads to either the underprovision of the resource being underfunded, or it doesn't get provided at all. So again, this kind of paradox where even though all the institutions would benefit, they won't come together without some kind of organizing principle to support the resource. So what I'd like to do is, again, we're talking about developing design principles, and I'm not going to present any design principles today. I'm going to tell you what the components are that we're looking at that we'll want to evaluate in order to develop the principles. And we're not going to go into these in any detail. You may be relieved to hear. But we will just provide an overview, and we can talk about them more in the question and answer period. So before we get into the model specifically, the resources themselves have an impact on collective funding. Whether they're basically a step cost, whether it's, for example, an infrastructure service, where it's basically, it's either provided or not provided at a certain cost, or whether it's volume driven, like for example, like content, affects how the model is set up. Whether it's one-time or recurring, and these things can happen obviously together. Whether it's a new resource or an existing resource will have effect on how much leverage the model will have in getting organizations to participate. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute when we talk about coordinating mechanisms. And then the trust that in the provider makes a big difference in organizing cost. And this is pretty obvious. I mean, some place like Cornell with our archive was a trusted provider, and there's a will to believe in that particular case, where if you're talking about other providers that aren't as well trusted, then it costs more to organize, and there's more of an apparatus that builds around it. Talking about the characteristics themselves, group size and group composition are very important. Typically, this is the concept that captures people's imaginations to begin with, is the idea that, look, if we get a lot of organizations, no matter how big the cost is, the cost per institution is going to be really low. So this is really appealing. It's just math. We just divide a large number by another large number, and it makes a small number, and isn't that great? But it doesn't work that way, because the larger the group gets, the less the individual, the marginal benefit to each participant, the less noticeable the contributions are, and this makes it easier for an institution to free ride, where their contribution isn't really seen, so they can kind of shirk, for lack of a better term. And so it's easier to free ride, and also the social incentives are less in a larger group where things get attenuated. If it's smaller groups, there's more of a social cohesion and social behavior going on. So what we need to do, and what needs to be done, rather, when describing these kinds of models, is identifying the ideal or optimal size subgroups and piecing together multiple subgroups rather than thinking just in terms of one universe. This same thing holds for group composition. In some cases, the group can deal with heterogeneity in terms of demand for a resource, the willingness to pay, and the ability to pay. There can be, again, heterogeneity there. But in terms of, there has to be social cohesion in order to make the group come together. And also, hopefully, if you're going to expand, there has to be a degree of reciprocity. So defining that critical mass of institutions that acts in any given case, both within individual projects and across multiple projects, will be important. There's an issue called demand revelation in the trade that deals with how do you figure out what value there is that an institution has for a resource. In a market environment, price is the market mechanism that tells you how much of a good you should provide, at what quality, but you don't have that with a public good. So how do you determine what that is? And you can either use market price surrogates or other kinds of proxies, but you need something. Otherwise, it's an aspect of free riding where an institution is incentivized to understate their value. Now, this sounds like something libraries would never do, but in nature, this is what happens, is that there's no reason for an institution to say exactly what value they place in something that it's in their best interest to understate it. Because we need to have a private benefit, or have a benefit to an institution to overcome the free riding, their selective benefits are used, and these can be private benefits that only contributors get. They can be social incentives, pride, shame, the kinds of things you'd use on an individual basis. Typically what's been used to date is governance input. So you see that with archive, for example, where the organizations supporting archive really want input into the direction of the organization, their policies, on both the researcher side and on the library side. And so that kind of participation was very, very important. That's not always the case, especially as you go beyond fairly narrow content types and try to make it into a larger, more ambitious type of scale. Governance input has less of a role. So we need to find some kind of proxy for that. At the extreme, you can have some kinds of enhanced services, things that are called joint goods, where basically a freemium model is an example of this, where one type of good basically cross-subsidizes another, and that's really a distinct kind of business model. But what happens also is these private incentives cost money, and they can take as many resources to, they can cost more to produce than they're worth. You've got this, again, the free rider stasis, there's inertia. How do you get institutions to participate? So there needs to be some kind of coordinating mechanism. And usually you'll have some activist institutions or individuals who will get the ball rolling, but how do you then coordinate institutions to get them to participate? And the model that's typically used is something called an assurance contract, which is basically a provisional agreement that's participation is contingent on a certain threshold of participation being reached. So we'll participate at this level if this many other institutions participate at that level. And so this it's conditional, so that you're not actually no one's actually committing until you're sure that the action is going to work. And typically high participation levels make those kinds of actions more successful. And the reason for that is that each individual organization's contribution is more visible when it's a high participation level. If it's a low participation level, then it's easier again to free ride. I mentioned earlier new versus existing services. This is another, when you're offering a new service, a new open resource, for example, you can make the provision of the resource contingent on the action succeeding. So we say, we'll provide this if enough people contribute to it. When you're talking about flipping journals, like John and Cameron will be doing, those are, act like new goods, because they're basically, they're gated, and now you're going to make them open, so there's a change of state. If you're talking about something like archive, where it's open and everyone knows that Cornell's not going to make it not open, you need some kind of leverage to get them, to get institutions to participate. And I won't go into what archive did, but that you need some kind of way, some kind of leverage to make that happen. You can also use cooperative models, which is part of the PKP project as well. It doesn't solve the free rider issue, but it does provide a kind of an organizational structure that can be used to coordinate activity. I mentioned earlier that, or all along, the cost is a big issue. That's one of the things that makes it difficult to launch successful collective actions. It just costs so much to organize. I mean, you look at something like Scope, which was ultimately successful, took 7 years, took a lot of time, a lot of money, and that's certainly not scalable. So we need a way to structure this so that the costs are low. There's a tension between simplicity, making these things as simple as possible, and satisfying all the contributors, because the contributors want it also to be simple, but they want their needs to be met, and those needs tend to multiply. So, and again, trust plays an important role. And what we want to, again, the real promise here, well, I think it would be great if we can come up with a model that makes it easier for individual initiatives to use collective funding models. What we really hope to be able to do is provide a blueprint so that multiple initiatives can share costs, share organizing costs, because a lot of these activities could be shared. You can replicate and geo-clone models, so you have regional clusters and a network of groups and subgroups where that routinely deal with each other, so you can develop reciprocity. And that reciprocity is really what will allow scale to take place. So that's it in a nutshell. I'd be glad to answer any questions at the end.
All right, thanks, Raym. Do we want to take, we've got a couple of minutes. Do you want to take a couple of questions now, Raym? Sure. Do we have a question right now that we can throw out there? Or you can save it to the end once you've got the whole complete presentation. John, why don't we, oh, sorry, yeah.
Sorry, very sorry. I might be very uninformed, and so forgive me, this is a very silly question, because I don't know anything about anything that's just been said, so forgive me.
No more than you started.
In this cooperative model, is it to fund open access publishing in existing journals? Is it to do away with journals and do something totally different? There's a piece that I'm not able to connect in my head with what's going on here.
Okay, well, from my part, with the both Spark's helping, Spark's working on both the cooperative modeling, which I didn't talk about today, and also on the collective funding aspect of it, because they go together, but they're not, they're separate parts. So what we're looking at looking at cooperatives across all types of open resources, and also collective funding across all sorts of collective resources. So journals, monographs, digital humanities, infrastructure services, advocacy for that matter. And so this isn't tailored to any one specific initiative. Now John's going to be talking about a particular initiative.
So that's a great question, segue question.
All right, John, why don't you turn it over to you?
So Raym is the theory, I want to be practice. Raym is the professional, I'm the amateur in this cooperative business. And what I want to set out is the MacArthur is a study, but it's a study focused on a hypothesis or a proposition around cooperatives. I'm standing on the floor because I don't have any slides. And I'm hoping to distract you from that fact by being in your faces. Because I want to talk about the principles, I do want to talk about the principles in a different way than Raym has, and I want to talk about the practices. We're proposing something that hasn't been done. We don't have any full-blown cooperatives, publishing cooperatives between journals, or among journals, libraries, publishing service providers, funding agencies, and we're talking about those. And I've been in the business of working in this area of cooperation and collaboration for almost 20 years. But now I'm talking about an actual cooperative association, the formation of it and the advantages of it. Raym started by setting the stage because this idea is at once foreign, cooperatives, hey, now you're in Canada? And so we have medical care and other services that are provided on a semi-cooperative basis. I don't know if you felt the burn. It's not that strong here, but we do have Justin. But at any rate, what I want to say is that the cooperative has already happened, in a sense. That I want to point out, as Raym did, that we have cooperative ventures going on now in scholarly publishing like we have never had before. So in talking to the Society of Scholarly Publishers, I want to say that this isn't something we're starting from scratch or proposing in a radical way. This is part of the undercurrent, or maybe more than the undercurrent, of what's going on. And whether to take advantage of that or not is up to you. The examples that Raym gave, I would add to, which were things like archive and scope, I would add to, in fact, with scope, I would point out that 3,000 libraries are in the form of a cooperative buying services from publishers for 10 journals. Now that isn't scalable. I agree, and it took 6, 8, we don't even know how many years really. But the idea that 3,000 libraries have agreed contractually to cooperate in the funding of these journals so that the physics journals, particle physics journals, actually what I like is they're high energy. And that's why they were first to do this. High-energy particle physics journals, is that redundant? That in that effort, they have agreed to pay for the services so that there are no APCs and there are no subscriptions, and they flipped those journals. But that's not the only kind of example. The Public Knowledge Project is an operation of the Simon Fraser University Library. And we have been operating for about 16, 17 years on that, and building open source software that we give to the world for free. And we're on our way, we're not quite there, I wish we were because of today and this presentation, but we're on our way to 10,000 journals using this software on a cooperative principle of open source software. Anyone can contribute to it, anyone can download it, anyone can use it for journal management, review, editorial, and publication. And so this effort on behalf of the libraries to begin to cooperate in scholarly publishing is a changing landscape, one that I want you to reckon with, that the libraries are investing and that the libraries are gaining expertise in scholarly publishing, and they are partnering with organizations rather than purchasing services in every instance. To give you some numbers, In the United States, there are 400 journals being supported by 115 libraries. Supported, they're being hosted. Most of them, actually half of them, not all of them, or maybe even 30% or 40% are using OJS. BE Press is getting some of that business as well. Other organizations are providing the management systems or the online systems. But the libraries are stepping up and saying, we are a partner in this publishing process. In Canada, we have 36 libraries and 270 journals being supported. 80% of them are open access. But what we've discovered is that 43 of those journals being hosted by the libraries were subscription journals. 43 of those journals gave up their subscription, got hosted by the library, and flipped to open access. And that, for us, is an act of cooperation. It doesn't mean that they're running for free. We can talk about the revenue. In fact, I want to talk about that. But it means that they have decided that it is in their interest and in their author's interest and the editor's interest to cooperate with the libraries and to provide their articles on an open access basis. There are lots of other examples. I would point to LOCKSS, to DSpace, to the Open Library of Humanities, where 181 libraries have agreed to support the journals, which are now about 10 or 12 of the Open Libraries of Humanities. What I want to talk about in terms of this cooperative, then, is the idea that we want to take the next step in terms of the organization. These libraries have memorandums of understanding with the journals. They provide free hosting, they update the software, they answer the odd technical question. They provide a platform and a support, they do some publicity or promotion. But the principles of the cooperative that I now want to look at is much more of a legal and organized fashion, much more of the contracting of third-party services. So let me set out, now that I've established, I hope in your minds, that cooperation isn't something new, but something that is growing, something that is part of the community now, the ecology of scholarly publishing. The cooperative would take it a couple of steps further. It would create a formal partnership, a formal association, a legal body between the journals and publishers on the one hand, the libraries on the other, and potentially the contracting of third-party services or the partnership of third-party services. They might also include funding agencies. We've got ELife, a biomedical journal that has risen in 2 years to be third in the field of biology. ELife is being sponsored by Howard Hughes Foundation, the Max Planck Institute, and Wellcome Trust. And so that, to me, forms a cooperative among a research institute, among a funding body, and a journal. And that funding body, certainly the Howard Hughes side of the funding body, is not a silent partner writing checks. I ran into an interview by the head, former head, mind you, of the Howard Hughes Foundation, and he said that ELife, what excited about him was they were going to kill the impact factor. Now, I don't quite know what that means, but I know that that is a very invested funding body, a very active partner, a very engaged sense of, I want to be a player in scholarly publishing. And the idea that we're going to have players and not just check writers is a key element of this cooperative. The cooperative I'm proposing is called a multi-stakeholder. Scope is all libraries, all the way through, with CERN backing them strongly, but they're buying services from the publisher. And that's fine, and that's one good model, but I want to suggest that the publisher could do better by being a partner in the cooperative, by sharing responsibilities and decision, but by having that buy-in and support. And I will suggest a way in a moment. The second aspect is it builds on existing allocations. Now, if I were to say to you, no new taxes, you would all have that kind of scary flashback a few presidents or so ago. But I'm going to say no new money, that we want to operate on existing allocations from the libraries. We want to operate on existing expense accounts from the journals. And we want to maintain, as it were, the same economy. This is not open access for free. This is open access because it's important and needs to be funded at the same level as subscription journals and as APCs have been providing. We want to pool resources. I've been arguing on behalf of the libraries, the expertise in publishing they've gained, no. But the expertise the libraries have in systems support, in software development, in technical support and training. And that expertise in terms of a partnership in publishing, I think will strengthen. Libraries are always very in touch with their patrons, their users. They understand the distribution and uptake of content. They would seem to me to be perfect partners in terms of scholarly publishing. We're also looking, and part of that, by the way, would be to start to credit the cash and in-kind contributions of libraries. The libraries that are hosting 400 journals in the US and 280 in Canada are providing substantial support that needs to be credited as part of this cooperative and will figure in the economy that I'm going to propose to you. Finally, two further points. One is the transparency and metrics. One of the great pleasures of doing studies and scholarly publishing are the non-disclosure agreements we continually run into. I have rumors on every figure that I cannot use because they have been whispered to me over too many drinks or too long an elevator ride. So the idea that we have non-disclosure in this economy that is based on the sharing of knowledge seems wrong-headed to me, frustrating as heck as a researcher, and not perhaps the best model in terms of the public good that Raym was talking about. And finally, the standards, the introduction and adoption of more international standards. That part of the metrics question for us has been the question of the adoption of international standards. And the cooperative in its commitment to transparency would be part of that. How are we going to do that? Let me briefly explain our proposed strategy. We're starting with the notion. Now, I have to explain that I had to come up with a 3-letter acronym that was more powerful than an APC that has swept this industry in how many years? 2, 3, 4 maybe? So what I've come up with is the SET. Now, it works out better. You can say it. Tennis players in the room, doesn't it feel good? The SET stands for a subscription equivalent transition. The biggest problem when Raym and I sit down to discuss these things between the theoretician and the amateur here is how do we get it started? Who's going to be the first mover? What would cause and demonstrate the trust a cooperative requires? How do I know that those free riders are not going to sink the ship? And the subscription equivalent transition is my promise or guarantee or contingent factor, as Raym pointed out. We want the libraries, if they are serious about open access, to commit to paying 3 years of a subscription equivalent fee into the cooperative as a transition. On that agreement of 100%, 90% of the libraries that subscribe to a journal, let's imagine this, let me go back one step. The library says, we're interested in open access, but where's our revenue going to come from? How can we publish on an open access basis? And the libraries say, we'll promise you a subscription equivalent transition for 3 years, during which time we will work out the basis of a cooperative. The basis that will include an allocation of resources equivalent to, necessary for your publishing. And if we can get the libraries to commit, we're asking the journals to say that in fact a subscription equivalent transition would be a revenue neutral proposition. You would have the same amount of money from the same number of subscribers, and if it was 10% less, then maybe the subscription equivalent transition would have to be negotiated to be 10% more. But there are other kinds of cost equations that come into effect. The journal would say, if you're willing to do that, then for 3 years we will go open access, because this actually is reversible. After 3 years of subscription equivalent transition fees, the journal has lost no money, the library has spent no more than they did before, and in that 3 years, through the transparency, the standards, all of the other commitments that are made, they will decide if they cannot afford to go forward on something less than the subscription equivalent. Well, not necessarily, but with some credit to the library's contribution, some credit for the technical and services support that the libraries are providing. And so the model starts with a demonstration of trust and commitment. It provides a buffer period in which to operate and set up the kinds of principles that Raym talked about in terms of setting up a cooperative. It allows for membership to increase or grow in terms of recruitment. or be reduced. It allows the libraries and the journals to agree on standards of membership, quality control, and a commitment that is still very much based on innovation, based on building a reserve, based on improving the quality of scholarly publishing, because that is what it is about. And that may well involve the contracting of publishing services. So PKP, the Open Journal Systems, as part of an open source software system, might be part of the solution that a cooperative would agree to. But we would, in a sense, OJS would have to compete against Springer, Elsevier, and others in terms of providing those publishing services. And the cooperative may decide that, and I have to tell you, this is a true confession here, that open source software isn't free. It's just free to download. That open source software does have to be maintained, and while we provide upgrades, there are still technical support services and other things. So understandably, we will have, perhaps for the first time, an open market in terms of these third-party publishing services as part of the cooperative. Now, the research part is that we are floating, we are trying, we are testing this balloon with different communities. Cameron's going to present the library's initial response, because we think the libraries are the first movers in this case. We need that commitment before we go to the journals and publishers, and we have some initial findings to present to you. But the second side will be to come to the publishers and start exploring the possibilities of this kind of association. Perhaps not for all of your journals, perhaps not for all of the different ways in which you're working with journals, but on the possibility that this could be a further way of operating, a further way of building, as it were, the scholarly ecology in which you participate. We have 3 pilots underway at this point. Well, 3 case studies. They're not quite pilots. I'm getting ahead of myself here, forgive me. In Canada, we are looking at an agreement with CRKN, which is the Canadian Research Knowledge Network, that is the single purchasing agent for the libraries. They have a current agreement with Erudite that comes out of Université de Montréal, where they are funding both subscription and open access journals, and we want to extend that to involve a great number of English language subscription journals and begin to see if we can't pilot that. We're doing the financial modeling of that, and we're finding, in fact, that the level of library participation, and there's a good deal of subsidization in Canada, there are many sources of support from institutions, that in the area of 70% of the libraries need to participate for it to be revenue neutral for the subscription journals. But each case is a little bit different. We have an anthropology, a group of international anthropology journals that have formed a collective called Libraria, about 11 journals that have been talking to AAA, which has American Anthropological Association, which has 32 journals, to talk about a subject, a discipline-based cooperative. In this case, again, we have the same sense that there's something within the spirit of anthropology that is moving towards open access, and AAA was not always a big enthusiast of open access, but they are now interested in the concept. They have at least one journal now experimenting with open access with Wiley Blackwell, and so there is a demonstrated interest that we didn't have a few years ago. A third example is in Ghana. We want to see this as a globally scalable model. Well, I wouldn't say globally, that's too grandiose, but perhaps it can be piloted on a global basis. And in Ghana, the libraries and journals in the country have committed themselves to explore the possibilities of having a national, much like Canada, a national basis for subsidizing is part of it, for forming a cooperative in terms of beginning to explore an alternative model of supporting African journals. Africa is no farther ahead in terms of open access, but the case in Africa is often the matter that if the journals have a subscription tag to them, they are not being read widely at all. So there's a very strong motive in terms of moving the journals to open access. I want to bring it to a close there. You're going to get a chance to weigh in electronically on your phones, and oh, you're already on your phones. Those of you getting a good head start, and computers too, I appreciate that. But first, let's have some data. First, let's have some responses from the libraries of the preliminary findings, Cameron.
Yep.
In terms of our first side. We're going to do a similar parallel survey with the journals. In fact, we should have that ready in a week or so, and give you a chance to weigh in a similar fashion. But we're also going to do that electronically today with a software called Poll Everywhere. So an interactive moment. Thank you.